The silence in the Galactic Council chambers was absolute. Commander Zexhai of the Krillian Empire stood frozen, his forearms trembling as he stared at the holographic evidence floating before him. The images were clear, too clear. A human settlement on the rim world of Kepler 442b. Burning. The charred remains of what had once been a thriving colony of 800 souls. Explain this, rumbled Elder Vorthak, the ancient titan whose voice could crack mountains. His massive form loomed over the assembly, casting shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence. Some had tentacles that writhed nervously. Others had scales that shifted color with distress. But all shared the same expression of horror. Commander Zexhai's throat sacs inflated with panic. Elder Vorthak, we didn't know they were human. The intelligence report said it was a mining colony of Terran descent settlers. We thought they were just another species under human protection. You thought wrong, hissed Ambassador Kilnara, her serpentine form coiling tighter around her floating platform. 800 innocents. 800 humans. Do you have any idea what you've done? The hologram shifted, showing the aftermath. Emergency beacons still flashing among the rubble. Rescue ships bearing the distinctive blue and white markings of the Human Federation arriving too late. And there, recorded in perfect clarity, Krillian warships fleeing the scene. The accords were clear, Elder Vorthak continued, his ancient eyes burning with an intensity that made even the bravest warriors in the chamber look away. Article 1, Section Alpha. Humans are off limits. We don't harm them, ever, under any circumstances. But Elder, Zexhai protested, they're just another species. Weak, short-lived, barely evolved past their primitive. The sound that erupted from Elder Vorthak wasn't quite a roar and wasn't quite a scream. It was something deeper, more primal. The sound of fear itself given voice. Every being in the chamber recoiled as if struck. Just another species? Vorthak's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his loudest bellow. Commander, how long have you been in service? 43 cycles, Elder. Then you're young enough to have missed the lessons of the Terran Wars, young enough to have forgotten why we made those accords in the first place. Vorthak's massive form shifted, and the chamber's lights dimmed as he accessed the historical archives. Perhaps it's time for a reminder. A new hologram materialized, older, grainier, but unmistakably real. It showed a space battle of unimaginable scale. Thousands of ships locked in combat around a binary star system. The timestamp read, 2387 CE, the Battle of Wolf 359. This was our first real encounter with humanity in war, Vorthak said. The Hegemony Alliance, 6 of our most powerful military species united, decided these primitive humans would make easy conquests. We had superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. The hologram showed massive alien dreadnoughts, each one dwarfing the small human vessels that darted between them like insects. The size difference was laughable. It should have been a massacre. The human fleet was outnumbered 1,000 to 1, Vorthak continued. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive. Victory seemed certain. The hologram played on. Then something changed. The human ships began moving in patterns that defied tactical sense. They weren't retreating. They weren't forming defensive lines. They were attacking. What happened next changed the course of galactic history forever. A human vessel, no bigger than a Krillian fighter, rammed itself directly into the bridge of a Hegemony flagship. The explosion was catastrophic, taking out not just the target but 3 nearby cruisers caught in the blast radius. They sacrificed themselves, whispered Ambassador Yiltar of the Centauri Collective, her 4 eyes wide with remembered terror. Not one ship, not 10, all of them. Every human vessel in that battle chose death over surrender. The hologram showed it all. Human ships loaded with their own explosives, turning themselves into guided missiles. Captains manually overriding their own life support systems to create toxic clouds that disabled enemy boarding parties. Pilots ejecting not to escape, but to float through space and detonate personal charges against hull breaches. In 4 hours, Vorthak said, 1,000-ship hegemony armada was reduced to debris. Not a single human survived. But neither did we. Commander Zexhi's skin had gone pale green. But that's impossible. No species fights like that. No rational being chooses certain death. That's where you're wrong, Commander. Humans don't fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemies lose. There's a difference. Elder Vorthak manipulated the hologram again. This is what happened next. New images appeared. A human colony ship, massive, utilitarian, bearing the scars of hasty construction. But it wasn't alone. It was followed by dozens of others, then hundreds, then thousands. The colony ship that held the families of those who died at Wolf 359, Vorthak explained. They received word of the battle's outcome and changed course. Not to flee, to attack. The timestamp showed 3 months after Wolf 359. The images showed the hegemony's home systems, burning worlds, entire civilizations, reduced to ash. They didn't stop with military targets, whispered Kilnara. They didn't follow the rules of war. They went after everything. Military bases, supply lines, civilian populations, even terraforming projects on uninhabited worlds. They wanted to make sure we could never threaten them again. The hegemony sued for peace after 6 months. Vorthak continued. But the humans didn't accept. They said they were just getting started. More images flashed by. Human construction yards working around the clock. Ships being built faster than should have been possible. Not sleek warships, but ugly, functional things designed for one purpose, carrying the largest possible payload of destruction. They industrialized warfare in a way we'd never seen, turned their entire civilization into a war machine. Every human became a soldier. Every factory became an armory. Every ship became a weapon. How did you stop them? Zexhi asked, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. We didn't, Vorthak said simply. They stopped themselves. The hologram shifted to show a transmission, grainy, obviously ancient, but clear enough to make out the human figure speaking. An elderly woman in a simple military uniform, standing in what appeared to be the bridge of a massive vessel. This is Admiral Chen, speaking for the Human Federation. Her voice crackled through the translation. Systems, we've received your latest surrender offer. Once again, we decline. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the chamber. However, Admiral Chen continued, we're prepared to offer terms of our own. Complete withdrawal from all systems within 50 light years of human space. Reparations to be paid over the next century. And most importantly, here her voice hardened, formal recognition that humans are off limits. Forever. We agreed immediately, Vorthak said. What choice did we have? But then something unexpected happened. The hologram showed Admiral Chen again, but now she looked older, wearier. The war ends today, she said. But understand this, it doesn't end because we've forgiven you. It ends because we've learned something about ourselves that we don't like. We've discovered we're very, very good at destroying things, too good. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to bend space itself. So we're making a choice. We're choosing to step back. We're choosing to be better than our worst impulses. But never, never mistake this mercy for weakness. We're not stopping because we can't continue. We're stopping because we choose to. The transmission ended. The chamber fell silent. That was the birth of the Galactic Accords, Vorthak said. Article 1. Section Alpha wasn't imposed on us by the humans. We wrote it ourselves. Because we understood that humanity has something no other species possesses, the ability to weaponize their own extinction instinct. He gestured to the original hologram, still showing the burning colony on Kepler 442b. Commander Zexhi, you've just reminded them that we exist. You've just told 800 human families that someone in this galaxy thinks their lives don't matter. The ancient Titan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Do you have any idea what's coming? As if summoned by his words, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in pulsing red. A communications officer burst through the sealed doors, his tentacles flailing in panic. Elder Vorthak, Priority Alpha. Transmission from the Human Federation. Admiral Sarah Chen, she's the great-granddaughter of the Admiral Chen from the archives. The blood in Commander Zexhi's veins turned to ice. The hologram materialized instantly. The woman who appeared bore a striking resemblance to her ancestor, the same steel in her eyes, the same dangerous calm in her posture. But where the Elder Chen had looked weary, this one looked hungry. Elder Vorthak, Admiral Sarah Chen said, her voice carrying across space with crystal clarity. I believe we need to talk. Chapter 2. The Reckoning begins the Human Federation flagship. Retribution's edge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the neutral zone like a knife cutting through silk. But it didn't come alone. Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the Krillian patrol vessel Swift Current, watching his sensors paint a picture that couldn't possibly be real. One ship had become 10, 10 had become 100, and they were still coming. Sir, his navigation officer whispered, I'm reading over 3,000 vessels, and they're all broadcasting human signatures. Rivera's 4 hearts hammered against his chest cavity. 3,000? That's impossible. The entire human military only has... Sir, his communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a general broadcast. It's from the humans. Put it through. Admiral Chen's image filled the main screen. She was older than she'd appeared in the council transmission, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines of command etched around her eyes. Behind her, Rivera could see the organized chaos of a warship's command center. Officers, moving with practiced efficiency. Tactical displays showing formations that made his tactical training seem like a child's game. Attention all vessels in this sector, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Federation Navy. 12 hours ago, forces belonging to the Krillian Empire attacked and destroyed a human civilian colony on Kepler 442b. 800 civilians died. Rivera felt his crew's eyes turn toward him. As the ranking Krillian officer in the sector, he suddenly found himself representing his entire species. In accordance with the Galactic Accords, this act constitutes a violation of Article 1, Section Alpha. The protection of human civilians has been compromised. Chen paused and her expression hardened. Therefore, the Human Federation is implementing Protocol 7. Every alien officer on the bridge went rigid. Protocol 7 was a legend, a nightmare scenario discussed in whispered conversations at the academy. No one was even sure it really existed. Sir, his tactical officer stammered. What is Protocol 7? Rivera opened his mouth to answer, then realized he didn't know. None of them did. The humans had never shared the details of their emergency. Protocols with other species. Admiral Chen continued as if she could hear their confusion across the void of space. For those unfamiliar with our internal procedures, Protocol 7 authorizes the mobilization of the entire human defense network. Every ship, every station, every colonial militia is being activated. Our civilian population is being evacuated to secure facilities. The tactical display behind her shifted, showing a 3-dimensional map of human space. Red indicators began appearing, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. We are not declaring war, Chen said. And somehow that was more terrifying than if she had. We are simply ensuring that such a violation never happens again. Rivera's communications officer looked up from his console, his face pale with shock. Captain, I'm picking up additional transmissions. Human merchant vessels, colony ships, even private yachts, they're all being recalled to designated rally points. How many? Rivera asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Sir, I'm reading mobilization orders for over 50,000 vessels. 50,000? Rivera stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. That's not a military response. That's an entire civilization preparing for war. Admiral Chen's transmission continued. The vessel responsible for the attack has been identified as the Krillian battlecruiser, Skyrender, under the command of Captain Veltar. This vessel and its crew are to surrender themselves to human authorities within 72 hours. Rivera knew Captain Veltar. They'd served together during the Andorian trade disputes. He was a good soldier following orders from the High Command, but that wouldn't matter to the humans. If this demand is not met, Chen continued, we will come and collect them ourselves. I want to be very clear about this. We don't want a war, but we will have justice for our people. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in absolute silence. Sir, the tactical officer said finally, what are your orders? Rivera stared at the sensor display showing the growing mass of human ships. 3,000 had become 5,000, and according to the long-range sensors, more were arriving every hour. Send a priority message to the Krillian High Command, he said. Tell them we have a situation. 3 sectors away, in the gleaming towers of the Krillian capital, fleet, Admiral Kexran dismissed the report with a wave of his primary hand. 5,000 ships? He laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Captain Rivera is panicking over nothing. Humans are all bluster. They make a show of force, demand some minor concessions, then go back to their little colonies and pretend to be pacifists. General Kilnash, head of Krillian intelligence, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Sir, perhaps we should consider what? Giving in to human theatrics? Kexran stood and walked to the massive windows overlooking the capital city. Below, millions of Krillians went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their government had just violated the most important treaty in galactic history. The accords were signed by a different generation, Kexran continued. Krillians who were intimidated by human propaganda and exaggerated claims. But we've studied them for decades now. We know their weaknesses. He activated a holographic display showing human space, a relatively small bubble in the galaxy's vast spiral arm. Look at them. Barely 300 systems, a population of maybe 200 billion spread across dozens of worlds. They can't possibly sustain a real war against the Empire. Sir, Kilnash pressed, the intelligence reports suggest the intelligence reports are based on human lies and propaganda. Kexran slammed his fist against the window, leaving a crack in the reinforced material. They want us to believe they're some kind of unstoppable force. But they're mammals, Quillnash. Soft, emotional, short-lived mammals. A communications officer entered the room, her movements careful and precise. Fleet Admiral, we have an incoming transmission from Admiral Chen of the Human Federation. Kexran's laugh was dismissive. Put her through. Let's see what demands the humans think they can make. Admiral Chen appeared in the room's center, her holographic form somehow managing to dominate the space despite being merely a projection. She looked tired, but her eyes held a focus that made even Kexran pause. Fleet Admiral Kexran, she began without preamble. I'm transmitting the location of your battlecruiser, Skyrender. My offer stands. Surrender the ship and its crew within 72 hours, and we can resolve this through proper channels. Kexran stepped forward, his full height making him tower over the human projection. Admiral Chen, I think you misunderstand the situation. The Skyrender was acting under direct orders to secure mineral rights in that system. If human colonists were present, it was an unfortunate miscommunication. 800 people died. Admiral, regrettable, certainly. We're prepared to offer appropriate compensation. No. Chen's voice cut through his words like a blade. This isn't about compensation. This is about justice. Kexran felt his anger rising. No alien species had spoken to him like this in decades. Admiral, I think you're overestimating your position. The Krillian Empire has fleets in 7 sectors. We have defense treaties with 12 species. If you're suggesting military action, I'm not suggesting anything, Chen interrupted. I'm telling you what's going to happen. In 72 hours, if Captain Veltar and his crew haven't surrendered, we're coming to collect them. You would risk war over one ship? Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the room. Admiral Kexran, are you familiar with human history? I know enough. Then you know we fought wars over much less than 800 innocent lives. We've burned down civilizations for a single insult to our flag. We've reduced entire continents to ash over economic disputes. She paused. But this isn't about history. This is about the future. The hologram flickered, replaced by a tactical display showing human space. But now the display showed something that made Kilnash grip his chair arms. This is the current mobilization status of human forces, Chen continued. As of this moment, we have activated 63,000 vessels. Military, civilian, corporate, and private. Every human ship capable of mounting weapons or carrying troops. The display zoomed out, showing the deployment pattern. Ships were moving in massive formations toward the borders of human space, not just toward Krillian territory, toward all of their borders. You're mobilizing your entire civilization, Quillnash whispered. Yes, Chen replied simply. Because we learned something a long time ago, General. We learned that the only way to ensure peace is to be more prepared for war than anyone else is prepared to fight us. Kexran found his voice. This is madness. You can't maintain that level of mobilization. The economic cost alone will be irrelevant if we don't survive. Chen finished. Admiral, the human economy shifted to full war production 11 hours ago. Every factory, every shipyard, every industrial facility is now producing military materials. We estimate we can sustain this level of mobilization for approximately 7 years before serious shortages begin. 7 years, Quillnash repeated, in horror. And in those 7 years, we will construct an additional 200,000 warships. Because that, Admiral Kexran, is what humans do when someone threatens our people. We don't just fight back, we make sure the threat never arises again. The transmission ended, leaving the 3 Krillians alone with the implications of what they'd just heard. Sir, Quillnash said finally, I recommend we comply with their demands. Never, Kexran snarled. I won't bow to human intimidation. Alert the fleet. If they want war, we'll give them one. But even as he gave the order, Admiral, Kexran felt a chill of doubt, because somewhere deep in his genetic memory, buried in the instincts that had kept his species alive for millions of years, a small voice was screaming that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Chapter 3. When humans hunt Captain Veltar of the WoW, Krillian battle cruiser Skyrender had been many things in his long military career. A decorated war hero, a tactical genius, a leader of warriors. But as he stared at the sensor readings from his ship's long-range scanners, he felt something he'd never experienced before. True, existential terror. Captain, his navigation officer reported, his voice barely steady. I'm reading 17. Distinct human fleets converging on our position. Total vessel count is... He paused, checking his readings again. Is over 8,000 ships. Veltar's tactical mind tried to process the information. 8,000 ships. The entire Krillian Navy had maybe 3,000 vessels spread across 7 sectors. The humans had deployed nearly 3 times that force to capture 1 battlecruiser. Sir, his communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission. It's from the human flagship. Put it through. The figure that appeared on his main screen wasn't Admiral Chen. This was someone younger, wearing the uniform of a human marine commander. Her name patch read Torres, and her expression was carved from stone. Captain Veltar, she began. I am Commander Elena Torres, 3rd Human Marine Expeditionary Force. You have been charged with the murder of 800 human civilians in violation of the Galactic Accords. You will prepare to be boarded. Commander, Veltar replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I am prepared to discuss surrender terms through proper diplomatic channels. There's no need for, I'm not here to negotiate. Torres cut him off. I'm here to collect you. The screen shifted to show the space around his ship. What Veltar saw defied every military principle he'd ever learned. The human fleet wasn't arranged in any recognizable formation. Instead, they'd formed a perfect sphere around his position with his ship at the center. As you can see, Torres continued, you're surrounded. Completely. Every possible escape vector is covered by no fewer than 50 human vessels. If you attempt to run, you will be disabled and boarded. If you attempt to fight, you will be destroyed, and we'll collect your wreckage. Veltar's tactical officer looked up from his console. Sir, I'm reading weapon signatures on all human vessels. They're not military standard. They're civilian ships that have been weaponized. The screen showed the truth of it. Cargo haulers bristling with missile pods. Passenger liners with their windows replaced by gun ports. Even small pleasure craft had been fitted with ramming spikes and explosive charges. Every human ship in this fleet, Torres explained as if reading his thoughts, is crewed by volunteers, people who left their jobs, their families, their lives to come here. Do you know why? Veltar said nothing. Because word got out about what you did on Kepler 442b. The humans you killed, their names, their faces, their stories. Every person in this fleet knows at least one of them. Torres leaned forward. My sister lived on that colony, Captain. She was a teacher, ran a school for the children. The weight of her words settled over the bridge like a shroud. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't a threat. She was trying to help kids learn to read. Torres's voice never changed tone, never betrayed emotion, but something in her eyes burned like a star going nova. She was in the school when your weapons hit it. Veltar felt his crew looking at him. These were good soldiers, warriors who'd followed him through a dozen campaigns. They didn't deserve to die for the High Command's mistake. Commander Torres, he said finally, I'll surrender myself and my senior staff, but I want safe passage guaranteed for my crew. No. The simple word hit like a physical blow. Captain, every member of your crew participated in the attack. Every gunner who fired, every engineer who maintained the weapons, every navigator who plotted the course. They all share responsibility. They were following orders. So were the guards at the concentration camps. Torres's reference to ancient human history was deliberate, calculated to drive home the moral absolute she represented. Captain, there are no innocent bystanders in genocide. Before Veltar could respond, alarms began screaming throughout his ship. His tactical officer spun to his console, confusion written across his features. Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the human fleet. They're powering up for something. The main screen shifted to show space around them. The human ships were repositioning, moving with mechanical precision. And then Veltar saw something that made his blood freeze. They weren't just forming a sphere around his ship. They were building something. Ship after ship was docking with its neighbors, creating a massive superstructure. Within minutes, his single battlecruiser was surrounded by what was essentially a space station. One made up of 8,000 different vessels all linked together. What are they doing? His engineer whispered. Commander Torres answered from the screen. We're creating a controlled environment, Captain. You see, we've learned that when we take prisoners in space, sometimes accidents happen. Ships explode. Life support fails. People get exposed to vacuum. The implications hit Veltar like a sledgehammer. You're going to execute us. No, Torres replied. We're going to try you, properly, with lawyers, judges, evidence, and witnesses. But we're going to do it out here in space where there's no chance of you escaping or anyone interfering. More alarms sounded. Veltar's sensors were showing human boarding craft detaching from the superstructure, dozens of them, approaching from every angle. Captain, his weapons officer called out, should we fight? Veltar looked around his bridge, at the crew who'd served with him for 5 years, warriors who'd followed him through the Centauri conflicts and the Vegan trade wars, good soldiers who'd made one terrible mistake. No, he said quietly. Power down all weapons. Prepare to be boarded. The first human Marines who came through his airlock were different from what he'd expected. They weren't the towering warriors of propaganda or the savage berserkers of legend. They were small, precise, professional. They moved through his ship with the efficiency of a medical team, securing each section with minimal violence. But it was their eyes that disturbed him most. Every human he saw had the same expression, not hatred, not rage, but something far more unsettling. They looked at him and his crew the way a scientist might look at a particularly dangerous virus sample, with clinical detachment and absolute determination to contain the threat. Commander Torres was the last to board, her Marine escort forming a protective phalanx around her as she walked onto his bridge. She approached Veltar directly, stopping just outside arm's reach. Captain Veltar, by the authority granted to me by the Human Federation Military Justice Code, you are under arrest for crimes against humanity. You have the right to representation, the right to present evidence in your defense, and the right to appeal any verdict." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that seemed to bend reality around it. "You also have the right to know that your trial will be broadcast throughout the galaxy. Every species, every government, every individual who can receive transmissions will see exactly what happens to those who harm human civilians." As the restraints clicked around his wrists, Veltar realized the true scope of what the humans were doing. This wasn't just about justice for 800 dead colonists. This was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. A message written in the fate of him and his crew. The boarding was complete within an hour. Every Krillian on the Skyrender was now in human custody, and the ship itself had been claimed as evidence. But as Captain Veltar was led through the corridors of the human superstructure toward whatever served as their detention facility, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, because outside, in the vast darkness of space, the rest of the human fleet was still arriving. Ship after ship dropping out of hyperspace with mechanical regularity, and each one carried the same message that Commander Torres had delivered. When you harm a human, they don't just seek justice. They make sure you never get the chance to do it again. Chapter 4. The Price of 800 Lives. The Trial of Captain Veltar and his crew began exactly 72 hours after the attack on Kepler 442b. But it wasn't held in any courtroom that galactic civilization would recognize. Instead, the humans had constructed something unprecedented in the void of space. The 8,000 ships surrounding the captured Skyrender had been transformed into a massive amphitheater with viewing galleries, broadcast stations, and a central chamber where justice would be administered. Representatives from every major species had been invited to observe. Elder Vorthak arrived on the Titan embassy ship, his ancient form requiring special accommodations. As he was escorted through the human construct, he couldn't help but marvel at the engineering. In less than 3 days, they'd built a functioning city in space. "Impressive," he rumbled to his aide, a younger Titan named Kolrath. "They've turned a military fleet into a courthouse." "Elder," Kolrath replied nervously. "Should we be here? The other council members think this is all for show, a way for the humans to demonstrate their power." Vorthak stopped at one of the viewing ports. Outside, he could see the continuing arrival of human ships. The fleet now numbered over 20,000 vessels, with more arriving hourly. "This isn't a show," he said quietly. "This is a reckoning." In the central courtroom, Captain Veltar sat in a defendant's dock that had been specially constructed to accommodate his physiology. Around him, his crew occupied similar seats. 127 Krillians who had served aboard the Skyrender during the attack. The human judge was an elderly woman, named Justice Sarah Blackwood, her silver hair pulled back severely and her expression neutral. But Veltar could see the steel in her eyes, the same hardness he'd noticed in every human he'd encountered since his capture. "This tribunal," Judge Blackwood began, "is convened under the authority of the Human Federation Military Justice Code and the Galactic Accords. The defendants are charged with violations of Article 1, Section Alpha, the deliberate targeting and killing of human civilians." She gestured to a holographic display that materialized in the center of the courtroom. It showed the Kepler 442b colony as it had been before the attack, a small but thriving settlement carved out of alien wilderness. "The prosecution will demonstrate that on stardate 2389.147, the defendants knowingly and deliberately attacked a civilian population, resulting in the deaths of 800 innocent men, women, and children." The lead prosecutor was a human woman named Colonel Janet Pierce. She was younger than the judge, but carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd seen too much combat. As she stood to present her opening argument, the courtroom fell silent. "Your Honor," Colonel Pierce began, "this case is not just about the actions of one ship or one crew. This is about whether the Galactic Accords mean anything, about whether the protection of civilian populations is a principle worth upholding." She activated the holographic display showing the moments before the attack. The sky render in orbit around Kepler 442b, running detailed scans of the colony below. The defense will claim this was a mistake, Pierce continued. That they believed they were attacking a military installation or a legitimate industrial target, but the evidence will show otherwise. The hologram shifted, displaying the ship's sensor logs. The scans clearly showed civilian structures, homes, schools, hospitals, farms. There was no way to mistake it for anything but what it was. The defendants had 12 hours to analyze their target, Pierce said, her voice rising. 12 hours to confirm what they were looking at. 12 hours to realize they were about to commit mass murder. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom, and they fired anyway. The trial that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans presented their case with methodical precision, calling witness after witness, expert after expert. They showed intercepted communications proving the Krillians knew exactly what they were attacking. They presented technical analysis of the weapons used, demonstrating that the fire pattern was designed to maximize civilian casualties. But most devastating of all were the victim impact statements. The humans had done something unprecedented. They'd brought survivors from Kepler 442b to testify, people who'd lost family members, friends, entire communities. One by one, they stood before the court and spoke about the people who died. My daughter Emily was 7 years old, testified. Dr. James Harrison, a colonial administrator who'd been off-world during the attack. She wanted to be a xenobiologist. She kept a collection of local insects in her room and she'd named every single one. The hologram showed a small human child, laughing as she played with some harmless alien creatures. She was in her school when the weapons hit. The teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, tried to shield the children. They found them together in the wreckage, the teacher's arms still wrapped around my daughter. Veltar watched the testimony with growing horror. In his military career, he'd reduced civilian casualties to statistics, numbers, and reports. But seeing the faces, hearing the stories, he began to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. The defense attorney, a Krillian lawyer named Advocate Yilmesh, did his best to present mitigating circumstances. He argued that the crew was following orders, that they believed they were attacking a legitimate target, that the rules of war were ambiguous in cases of colonial settlements. But the humans had anticipated every argument. Advocate Yilmesh asks us to consider the fog of war, Colonel, Pierce said during her rebuttal. He wants us to believe that highly trained military officers using advanced sensor technology somehow couldn't tell the difference between a military base and a civilian colony. She activated another holographic display, this one showing the aftermath of the attack. The ruins of homes, schools, hospitals, bodies being pulled from the wreckage. This is what 800 innocent lives looks like when they're reduced to statistics, when they become acceptable casualties in someone else's war. Pierce walked over to the defendants section, stopping directly in front of Veltar. Captain, you've had a distinguished military career. You've commanded troops in battle, made life and death decisions under pressure. You know the difference between a military target and a civilian population. She gestured to the holographic evidence surrounding them. So tell this court, tell the galaxy, why you chose to fire on a school full of children. Veltar stood slowly, his restraints allowing for limited movement. For the first time since his capture, he spoke directly to the humans who held his fate. Colonel Pierce, I won't insult this court by claiming ignorance. We knew what we were targeting. The question isn't what we knew, it's why we did it anyway. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. His own defense attorney looked stricken. The Krillian High Command ordered the attack because they believed humans were weak, Veltar continued. They thought your species would respond to brutality with negotiation. They thought fear would make you compliant. He looked directly at Judge Blackwood. They were wrong. And now I understand why the Galactic Accords exist. Not to protect you from us, to protect us from what you become when we threaten your people. The courtroom fell absolutely silent. I offer no defense for my actions, Veltar said. But I will say this. My crew followed my orders. If this court demands justice, take it from me. Let my warriors return to their families. Judge Blackwood studied him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried across the vast courtroom with perfect clarity. Captain Veltar, this court appreciates your honesty. But the law is clear. Every member of your crew participated in this attack. Every gunner who fired, every officer who transmitted targeting data, every engineer who maintained the weapons systems, they all made a choice. She paused, consulting the legal documents before her. However, the court recognizes the military command structure. Those who were following direct orders will receive reduced sentences. Those who gave the orders will face the full penalty. The verdict, when it came, sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Captain Veltar and his senior officers were sentenced to life imprisonment, but not in any conventional prison. The humans had constructed something far more symbolic. A detention facility built into an asteroid in the Kepler 442 system, where the prisoners would spend the rest of their lives looking out at the world they had devastated. The junior crew members received sentences ranging from 20 to 50 years, to be served in human rehabilitation facilities where they would learn about the species they had wronged. But the real shock came with Judge Blackwood's final statement. Let it be recorded throughout the galaxy, she said, that the human species does not seek vengeance, we seek justice. But let it also be recorded that justice, once invoked, will be absolute and final. She gestured to the thousands of ships surrounding the makeshift courtroom. This fleet will remain here in the Kepler system as a permanent memorial to those who died. Every ship you see represents 10 human lives lost to violence throughout our history. We station them here not as a threat, but as a promise that we will never forget, and we will never allow it to happen again. The aftermath of the trial rippled across the galaxy like a shockwave. Within hours of the verdict being broadcast, emergency sessions were called in dozens of governmental bodies. Trade routes were rerouted around human space. Military commanders updated their engagement protocols. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Emperor Crixtal of the Krillian Empire appeared via hologram before the Human Federation Council, his massive form filling the transmission chamber. Behind him stood the entire Krillian High Command, the architects of the attack on Kepler 442b. Chancellor Martinez, the Emperor began, addressing the human head of state. I come before you to formally surrender those responsible for ordering the attack on your people. Chancellor Maria Martinez, a woman in her 60s whose grandmother had survived the original Terran Wars, looked unmoved by the gesture. Emperor Crixtal, we appreciate your cooperation, but this goes beyond individual accountability. I understand. The Empire is prepared to pay reparations. This isn't about reparations, Martinez interrupted. This is about ensuring it never happens again. She activated a holographic display showing the current deployment of human forces. The numbers were staggering. Over 100,000 ships now mobilized, with production facilities working around the clock to build more. Emperor, your species violated the most fundamental principle of galactic civilization. You attacked civilians, deliberately, knowing exactly what you were doing. Chancellor, I assure you, no. Martinez's voice cut through the transmission like a blade. You've lost the right to make assurances. From this moment forward, the Krillian Empire will operate under direct human oversight. The implications hit the Emperor like a physical blow. You're demanding our surrender. I'm demanding accountability. Every Krillian military vessel will carry human observers. Every military operation will be pre-approved by human commanders. Every weapon capable of harming civilians will be monitored by human technicians. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. This will continue until we are satisfied that your species has learned the value of human life. And if we refuse? Chancellor Martinez's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes burned with an intensity that made the Emperor step back from his own holographic projectors. Then you'll discover why the Galactic Accords were written in the first place. The meeting between Chancellor Martinez and Emperor Crixtal was broadcast throughout the galaxy, and its effects were immediate. Species after species began revising their military doctrines, updating their rules of engagement, and most importantly, reinforcing the absolute protection of human civilians. But in the depths of space, far from the political maneuvering and diplomatic negotiations, something else was happening. Commander Elena Torres stood on the observation deck of the human fortress that now orbited Kepler 442b. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the planet below, scarred but healing, with new settlements beginning to rise from the ashes of the old. "Commander," her aide approached carrying a data pad. "The latest casualty reports from the initial mobilization." Torres took the pad, scanning the numbers. In the 3 weeks since the attack, the human military buildup had cost them significantly, not in lives but in resources. Entire sectors of the economy had been converted to war production. Families had been separated as personnel were deployed to strategic positions. Children had been evacuated from border worlds. 17 billion people displaced, she read aloud. Economic losses approaching 2 trillion credits. Industrial capacity at maximum strain. "Ma'am," her aide said carefully, "some of the council members are asking if the response might be disproportionate." Torres set down the datapad and looked back at the planet below. Somewhere down there, in a small cemetery near the ruins of the original colony, 800 graves bore witness to why they were here. "Aide, do you know why humans are the only species in the galaxy with a concept called total war?" "No, ma'am, because we're the only species that understands that some principles are worth any price. Some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed." She turned from the window, her expression carved from stone. 800 innocent people died because someone thought human lives were expendable. We've mobilized an entire civilization to prove them wrong, and we'll stay mobilized until every species in the galaxy understands that human civilians are off limits. "Forever, ma'am?" Torres smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "However long it takes." Epilogue. The New Galaxy. 5 years after the Kepler 442b incident, Ambassador Kilnara of the Serpentine Collective slithered through the corridors of the Galactic Council station, her scales shifting nervously between shades of green and blue. The quarterly meeting was about to begin, and she still couldn't quite believe how much had changed. The station itself was different now. Where once it had been a neutral meeting ground governed by committee, it now bore the unmistakable mark of human influence. Security checkpoints staffed by human Marines, communication systems upgraded with human technology, and most notably, a permanent human delegation with veto power over any resolution that might affect civilian populations. "Nervous?" asked Ambassador Yiltar of the Centauri Collective as they entered the main chamber together. "Aren't you?" Kilnara replied. 5 years ago, humans were barely a footnote in galactic politics. Now they effectively run the council. It was true. In the aftermath of Kepler 442b, the human species had leveraged their massive military mobilization into permanent political influence. They'd positioned fleets at strategic choke points throughout the galaxy, established monitoring stations in disputed territories, and most importantly, inserted human advisors into the military command structures of dozens of species. The official term was civilian protection oversight. Everyone understood it for what it really was: humanity ensuring that what happened to their colony never happened to anyone else. Elder Vorthak was already in his designated section when they arrived, his massive Titan form dominating that portion of the chamber. At over 800 years old, he was one of the few beings present who remembered the original Terran Wars. "Ambassadors," he rumbled in greeting, "I trust you've reviewed the agenda?" The agenda was typical for post-Kepler meetings: trade, disputes, territorial negotiations, resource allocation. But every item now carried an additional notation: human civilian impact assessment required. "It's remarkable," Yiltar mused, "how thoroughly they've integrated themselves into our decision-making process." "Is it?" Vorthak asked. "Or is it exactly what we should have expected?" Before either ambassador could respond, the chamber's lights dimmed. The meeting was beginning. Chancellor Martinez entered with her usual efficiency, flanked by 2 human aides and trailed by a small army of advisors. She took her place at the head of the chamber, a position that didn't officially exist in the Council's charter, but which everyone now accepted as natural. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings," she began, "thank you for gathering. Before we begin today's business, I'd like to present the quarterly Civilian Protection Report." A holographic display materialized, showing a map of known space. Green indicators marked systems under human protection, which now included virtually every inhabited world in the galaxy. "I'm pleased to report that we've had 0 incidents of deliberate civilian targeting in the past 93 days, Martinez announced. This represents the longest period of peace in recorded galactic history. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the chamber, though Kilnara noticed they sounded more relieved than celebratory. "However," Martinez continued, "we have identified several potential areas of concern." The display zoomed in on a system in the Outer Rim, where 2 minor species were engaged in a territorial dispute. The Velkari and Jontel conflict has escalated to the point where civilian populations may be at risk. Effective immediately, human peacekeeping forces will establish a buffer zone between the contested worlds. Ambassador Kylson of the Velkari. Delegation stood to object. "Chancellor Martinez, with respect, this is an internal matter between our species and—" "Ambassador," Martinez interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "There are 4 million civilians in the disputed zone, Velkari and Jontel alike. Their safety supersedes any territorial claim." The finality in her tone made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "Of course," Kylsen said, sitting back down. "The Velkari welcome human assistance in resolving this matter peacefully." And that, Kilnara reflected, was how things worked now. Humanity didn't ask permission. They informed you of what was going to happen. And everyone complied because the alternative was to find out exactly how far human patience extended. The meeting continued with similar exchanges. Trade routes were adjusted to ensure human cargo protection. Mining rights were negotiated with mandatory human environmental oversight. Even routine patrol schedules required human approval if they passed through systems with civilian populations. But the most significant agenda item came at the end. Finally, Chancellor Martinez announced, "I'm pleased to inform the Council that the Human Federation has approved the establishment of the Galactic Civilian Protection Corps." A new holographic display showed the organizational structure of what was essentially a galaxy-spanning police force. Human-led, but incorporating personnel from every major species. The Corps will have authority to investigate potential threats to civilian populations, intervene in conflicts that endanger non-combatants, and if necessary, use force to protect innocent lives. Elder Vorthak spoke for the first time during the meeting. "Chancellor, this represents an unprecedented expansion of human authority. Some might say it violates the principle of species sovereignty." Martinez turned to face the ancient Titan, her expression respectful but unyielding. "Elder Vorthak, species sovereignty is a luxury that depends on species responsibility. When the Krillians attacked Kepler 442b, they forfeited any claim to operate without oversight." She gestured to the chamber around them. "Every being in this room represents a civilization that has, at some point in its history, made the choice to target civilians. The Velkari bombardment of Jontel agricultural worlds, the Centauri blockade that starved 3 million Andromedans, the Serpentine raids on Terran mining colonies. Each species mentioned shifted uncomfortably as their past actions were catalogued. The only difference," Martinez continued, "is that when humans became the victims, we had the power to ensure it never happened again. And if we refuse to accept this new arrangement?" asked Ambassador Thelvar of the Andromedans. Martinez's smile was polite, but her eyes held the same dangerous calm that Kilnara had seen in every human leader since Kepler 442b. "Ambassador, humanity currently maintains active military forces, numbering 300,000 vessels. Our industrial capacity can triple that number within 18 months. Our civilian population has been trained and equipped for total war mobilization." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "We're not asking for your acceptance, Ambassador. We're informing you of the new reality. The meeting ended with the formal establishment of the Galactic Civilian Protection Corps, passed by unanimous vote, though everyone present understood that unanimity was achieved through the simple expedient of no one being willing to vote against humanity. As the ambassadors filed out, Kilnara found herself walking beside Elder Vorthak. "Elder," she asked quietly, "do you think this is what the humans always intended? This level of control?" The ancient Titan was quiet for a long moment, his massive form moving with surprising grace through the corridor. "No," he said finally. "I think they intended to be left alone to tend their gardens and raise their children in peace." "Then why?" "Because we wouldn't let them." Vorthak stopped at the viewing port that looked out into space. In the distance, the running lights of human patrol vessels could be seen maintaining their endless vigil. "We taught them that the galaxy was a dangerous place, that civilized species could not be trusted to protect the innocent, that the only way to ensure safety was through strength." He turned his ancient eyes toward her. "They learned the lesson too well." Kilnara followed his gaze to the human ships, their sleek forms moving through space with predatory grace. "Do you think they'll ever stand down? Return to being the peaceful species they once were?" Elder Vorthak's laugh was without humor. "Ambassador, humans have a saying, those who beat their swords into plowshares will plow for those who don't. They've learned that lesson, and they'll never unlearn it." As if to underscore his point, another human fleet dropped out of hyperspace nearby. Massive ships bearing the insignia of the Civilian Protection Corps, heading out to establish yet another monitoring station in some distant corner of the galaxy. "They've become what they needed to become," Vorthak continued. "The guardians of galactic civilization, whether we wanted them to or not." In the years that followed, historians would debate whether humanity's rise to galactic dominance was inevitable, or whether it could have been prevented. They would analyze the economic factors, the military innovations, the political maneuvering that allowed a species of barely 300 worlds to effectively control a galaxy of millions. But the truth was simpler than any of them realized. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy through strength or cunning or superior technology. They conquered it through the simple expedient of being the only species willing to pay any price, economic, social, or personal, to protect innocent life. And once they'd paid that price, they made sure everyone else understood it. The message was written in the fate of Captain Veltar and his crew, still serving their sentences in the shadow of Kepler 442b. It was written in the massive fleets that patrolled every trade route, every border, every system where civilians might be threatened. It was written in the Galactic Civilian Protection Corps, whose agents had the authority to override any government, any military, any authority that might endanger non-combatants. But most of all, it was written in the simple, absolute truth that had emerged from 800 graves on a distant colony world. Humans are off limits, and they will make sure everyone remembers why. End of story.